Welcome to the Deep Dive. We all want to learn new stuff, right? Well, you're in the right place if you want to get smart, fast on really interesting things. Like today, we're going to give you this shortcut to understanding something truly remarkable. It's about an astronaut's personal and professional life. We'll be looking at her reflections on balancing this really high-stakes career at NASA with all the amazing but tough parts of family life, like, being married but long distance, becoming a mother, all that.
And what I think you'll find really captivating as we really get into her story is how she managed to make those two totally different worlds work. It's so inspiring to see her resilience and creativity, especially when her life just didn't fit those traditional expectations. And, this is even more impressive considering that these fields, like being an astronaut, weren't really set up to consider different family situations. So what we want to do today is really dig into the main takeaways, the smart solutions she came up with to make it all work, her innovations, basically.
Sounds good. Let's jump right in. And I guess a good place to start is mission control, where so much of her professional life happened. Everyone's seen those movies, right?
Yeah.
With a room full of experts and all the tension.
Oh, yeah.
So our astronaut, she was a CAPCOM. That's the voice you hear talking to the crew in space, the one we all recognize. Think of it like this. You've got all these brilliant minds on the ground, each one super focused on their own specific thing, spacecraft systems or experiments, crew health, you name it. And they're all coming up with really important information constantly. Now imagine all of them trying to talk to the astronauts at once.
Yeah, chaos.
Total chaos, right?
Yeah.
So that's where the CAPCOM comes in. That's like the essential filter, that single point of contact, channeling all that information to the astronauts up in space and making sure it's clear and they can handle it all. It's not just spitting out technical stuff, though. This person has to take all of that complex data and translate it into something the crew can understand instantly. And on top of that, they have to advocate for the astronaut's point of view to all the different teams back on Earth. What kind of personality do you think does well in that kind of high-pressure, single point of contact role? And were there any unexpected challenges with that structure?
Well, you definitely need a pretty unique set of skills, right? You'd need empathy to really understand what those astronauts are going through up there, and diplomacy to handle all those different personalities back on Earth. Top-notch communication and listening skills are a must, and a healthy dose of confidence to be that clear, authoritative voice. And our astronaut, well, she was amazing in this role for years, a real bridge between Earth and space. But here's where it gets even more interesting. In 2001, she wasn't just bridging that gap between Earth and space, she was also, get this, a brand new mother to a breastfeeding baby. His name was Jamie.
Wow. Okay, so now we're talking about a whole other level of difficulty. Imagine a normal day in mission control. Long, intense, 9-hour shifts where you absolutely have to be focused the entire time, even taking a bathroom break is planned around mission events. So how do you even begin to figure out the time, and let alone the private space, to pump breast milk in that environment? And this isn't just some interesting story. It really makes you think about how workplaces need to change, move past those old ways of doing things, and create places that really support working parents. It's not just about being accommodating, it's about recognizing how much people with different life experiences can contribute.
Totally agree. It's essential.
I mean, I could hardly imagine it. But she had to find a way. And for her, the go for launch moment, it wasn't about some rocket taking off. It was her signal to make a mad dash out of mission control. Now, during missions, and even in simulations, they have these short breaks called loss of signal, or LOS breaks. They're usually only like 5-10 minutes long, happen when the communication satellites are out of range. Most people use them to go to the bathroom or grab a coffee.
Yeah.
But for her, those LOS breaks became her chance to pump, these crucial little windows of time. She had to work it out with her supervisors, adding a few extra minutes to these already super short breaks, making sure they were scheduled for times when they didn't expect any critical messages from the crew.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about time management, right?
Oh, absolutely. Time was definitely not on her side.
It's okay. So where did she do this? It wasn't some nice, comfy mother's room. The only spot close to mission control was the janitor's closet. But there's this little detail that really got me. All the janitors back then were women, and they were so supportive. They even brought her flowers and magazines. Isn't that amazing? This unexpected kindness and understanding in such a high-pressure environment.
Yeah, it really shows you how those informal support networks can pop up in the most unexpected places. And it speaks to their willingness to be part of the solution. But on top of all this, she also had to have these conversations with her male colleagues and supervisors about this very personal need, which, let's be honest, could have been really awkward. It says a lot about them that they were so accommodating.
For sure. But as she herself says, this whole janitor's closet situation was just one example of the many, many arrangements, negotiations, and precise timing she needed to juggle, being a new mother and having this career that wasn't exactly designed with mothers in mind. Thankfully, she had role models like Rhea Seddon, women who proved that it was possible to have a family and be an astronaut. But it was never easy, especially when your personal life didn't fit that traditional mold. And actually, this whole balancing act, it wasn't new for her. She'd been doing it for years in her long-distance relationship with Josh, even before Jamie came along.
And that's where we see another layer of unconventionality in her life. You see, her relationship with Josh, who is a glass artist in Western Massachusetts, he had shared custody of his son, Josiah. Right from the start, they didn't fit the usual expectations. The biggest problem, of course, was distance. Josh had his studio and co-parenting responsibilities in Massachusetts while she was tied to Houston for her job at NASA. Moving permanently just wasn't an option for either of them. Their story really makes you think about those societal rules we have for relationships. They show that it's okay to prioritize what really matters, that deep connection and commitment over how things are supposed to be.
So yeah, the relationship was this back and forth thing. They were constantly doing these weekend trips, often paying for it themselves just to see each other.
Yeah.
She talks about all these conversations she had on planes with strangers, the inevitable, are you married or do you have kids? Questions. And you could just sense that underlying doubt, like long distance could never be serious or last.
Those questions really show you how much people assume about what a real or committed relationship looks like, don't they?
Totally.
And their decision to use the word sweetheart instead of boyfriend, that was actually pretty clever. It communicated how deep and serious their connection was, and maybe made people rethink their assumptions. The fact that it wasn't the usual term probably made people stop and pay attention.
And even at NASA, which you'd think would be more traditional, they had these funny moments where they had to navigate their unusual relationship.
Yeah.
Like that time she tried to get Josh a tour of the Kennedy Space Center. The person organizing it kept asking if he was just a friend, then a good friend, then a very good friend, until she finally had to be like, he's the guy I've been sleeping with for 3 years. It's like they couldn't fit their relationship into those neat little boxes.
Exactly. And then comes the surprise proposal in Kauai. Even that wasn't straightforward. She needed time to really think it over, didn't immediately say yes. But the ring Josh gave her, it was so thoughtful. He'd incorporated his family history and the place they first met. It showed he really understood their unique bond.
And then the story gets even better. She makes this big yes sign to welcome him at the airport, and guess what? He misses his connecting flight. These little setbacks just highlighted their dedication. She went back to the airport, sign and champagne in hand, ready to do it all again. I mean, can you imagine? Waiting there with that sign, it really shows the extra mile they went, the real commitment they had to make this long-distance thing work. And they did eventually get married on their farm in Massachusetts, with family, friends, even her NASA colleagues there. Truly cemented their unconventional union.
And after their marriage, the question of having a child obviously brought its own set of challenges. Josh was confident they could make it work, and they had Kathy Thornton as an example, an astronaut who'd managed to raise 4 kids pretty much as a geographically single parent. So they knew it was possible. Not easy, but possible.
And it turns out she got pregnant really quickly, soon after her STS-93 mission. The Thanksgiving announcement to their families was probably a mix of excitement and how on earth are we going to do this?
Yeah.
But at least she knew she wouldn't be assigned to another flight straight away, so that was a bit of a break from some of her training.
Her views on space are also pretty thought-provoking. She firmly believed that humans belong in space, that it's where we should be. She really wanted to be part of those long-duration research missions on the International Space Station, the ISS. That ambition was a huge part of her identity, both as a scientist and as an astronaut.
Yeah. Before Jamie was born, she moved back to Massachusetts to spend some quality time with Josh. It was the longest time they'd ever been together, without having to rush back and forth. She really enjoyed those simple moments of being pregnant, preparing for their baby. Such a contrast to the high-pressure world of spaceflight. And Josiah, Josh's son, was also adjusting to this new family dynamic, a teenager figuring it all out.
And Jamie's arrival in August, well, that definitely changed her priorities, as you can imagine. Initially, she'd thought about going back to work pretty quickly, being the lead CAPCOM for Pam Melroy's mission. But Jamie had some health problems early on, which made her rethink everything. The advice she got from Ellen Ochoa to put her family first during those precious early weeks, that's a lesson for all of us. It's about creating a more understanding and supportive work environment that benefits everyone.
So instead of rushing back to mission control, she stayed home with Jamie. She even used some of that time to learn Russian, preparing for those future missions. She actually thinks those early months might have influenced Jamie's later talent for languages. Pretty cool. And even though she wasn't flying, she felt this strong connection to that first long-duration ISS crew. They were living out a dream she shared. She describes this really powerful image, looking at her baby sleeping and then thinking about those astronauts up in space. It really captures that incredible balancing act she was already doing even before going back to work.
And when she did return to Houston with Jamie, well, that's when the reality of being a geographically single parent in this super demanding job hit her, and it's something for all of us to think about. She talks about that feeling so many working mothers have, arriving at work already exhausted from all the morning chaos. Pumping during simulations became part of her routine, and on actual shuttle missions, she had to ship breast milk back to Massachusetts on dry ice, which meant sometimes sprinting to FedEx at the last minute. Talk about stressful.
Their life became this constant flow of visits, back and forth, back and forth. And Jamie, well, he racked up those frequent flyer miles like crazy. He was getting upgraded before either of his parents. It wasn't perfect, but as she says, it worked for them. They were a team, always figuring things out, taking turns with the parenting so they could both follow their passions.
But amidst all those arrangements and logistics, there was always that worry, wasn't there? That feeling of missing out on important moments. She tells this really touching story about 2-year-old Jamie hugging the television. Why? Because he heard his mother's voice on the NASA channel. It really shows you the emotional cost of being apart like that.
Saying goodbye at the Hartford airport became a regular thing, and it was tough. She describes trying to hold back tears until Josh and Jamie were out of sight. The United counter staff knew her well, always understanding and supportive. It really humanizes her, right? Behind this image of an astronaut, there's this real person dealing with these everyday challenges.
And then there were those moments, those crazy juggling acts that you wouldn't believe if you saw them in a movie. Like the time she threw the first pitch at Fenway Park, and then out of the blue got invited to Norway by the NASA administrator. Can you imagine the scramble to sort out childcare? Especially this really complicated handoff of Jamie at Houston's Intercontinental Airport during connecting flights, with her colleague Mary Lockhart coming to the rescue. It just shows you the constant puzzle they had to solve.
She makes a really good point when she compares it all to a space mission. You get these super detailed instructions for everything on a mission, every single step. But there's no manual for being a parent, especially a long-distance one in her line of work. And then there were those everyday problems, like the NASA daycare hours always clashing with her mission control shifts, which meant starting work at home super early in the morning.
That constant problem solving takes its toll, She realized she couldn't keep coming up with creative solutions forever. Her energy was limited, so she had to simplify things, streamline her routines, and accept that she couldn't make everyone happy all the time. Important lessons for all of us, I think.
It's so true. It's amazing how these small, unexpected moments can give you such profound insights into the human experience. Like when she was at a mommy bloggers convention and got this weird, shaddiest mom ever compliment.
That's a new one.
It sounds harsh, but it actually acknowledged the anxieties and pressures that so many parents feel, especially those who don't fit the mold. It wasn't an insult. It was a recognition of the tough path she was on.
It just shows you how much we all need reassurance as parents.
And her sister, Kariri, was always there for her, offering practical advice and reminding her what truly mattered. Those close, supportive relationships are so important. And even her brother, Kip, who was a stay-at-home dad, offered a valuable perspective on gender roles and what fathers go through. And then there were those choices that really make you stop and think. Like when she left her 2-year-old for 2.5 months to go on a meteorite hunting expedition to Antarctica. Makes you wonder, what does it really mean to be a good parent when you have this demanding career and these once-in-a-lifetime opportunities?
That expedition really shows her adventurous spirit and that drive to get experience in tough environments. The trip was appealing for so many reasons. The chance to learn teamwork in a remote, extreme place, the thrill of adventure and exploring, and the opportunity to contribute to important research. She was initially disappointed when she wasn't selected, and then, boom, this incredible chance came up.
And her family was so supportive, especially Josh. He encouraged her to go, even though he had a broken leg at the time. That says a lot about their relationship. She describes life at McMurdo Station and the meteorite search area in such vivid detail, the extreme conditions, the importance of teamwork, the amazing discoveries they made.
The parallels she draws between Antarctica and space are fascinating. Both are isolated, extreme environments. They rely on external supplies. They have to recycle everything. And there's always risk. And the feeling of being in this vast, almost untouched place It connects those two worlds in a way. And the meteorites they found, some even from the moon, that adds a whole other layer of wonder to it.
And even on this amazing, challenging trip, she still made sure to stay connected with Jamie. Photos, videos, recordings of his favorite books. It shows that her commitment to her career didn't diminish her role as a mom, but she's also honest about that pressure she felt, that need to appear effortlessly capable, something that many women and people of color experience in demanding fields.
And that pressure to be perfect, unfortunately, it affected her career progression at NASA, too. She found out from a friend that some people were hesitant to assign her to long-duration ISS missions. Why? Because of her alternative living situation, the family separation. And guess what? This didn't seem to be a concern for her male colleagues who also had families. Double standard much.
She was understandably frustrated. She'd proven she could handle a long-distance relationship and motherhood, but now it was being used against her. It shows how sneaky gender bias can be, operating in these subtle but impactful ways.
And the fact that these decisions were being made by men without even talking to her about how she managed it all, that's the systemic bias right there. Her decision to go for a job in the ISS branch so the management could see her capabilities, that was smart. She was proactive, taking charge of her own career path.
Absolutely. And she had some key male allies, like Chris Hadfield, who saw her talent and spoke up for her. He focused on her skills and performance, and that eventually led to her becoming the head of robotics. His support, his willingness to look past those traditional expectations was so important. And when she led the robotics branch, she prioritized results and supported work-life balance for her team. Her leadership style reflected her own experiences and values.
Which brings us back to that idea of function over form in families. She makes a strong case that family is about those strong bonds, that trust, that feeling of security for the children. It doesn't matter if it looks like a traditional family or not.
Their own family, with Josh, it took real effort to make it work well for both of their sons. They had all these strategies to stay connected with Jamie, even though he was living in two homes, going to two different schools. Regular phone calls, always on speakerphone so everyone felt included, keeping his teachers in the loop, sharing photos. They were intentional about staying connected.
Even little things, like Jamie often missing his Little League playoffs because his school year in Massachusetts ended later than in Houston, those were the trade-offs of their unconventional life. And she was always trying to connect Jamie to her work, taking him to see the NASA simulators, telling him bedtime stories from wherever she was in the world, even taking his stuffed animals on trips.
She's adamant that family doesn't have to look a certain way to work well, but it takes courage to define your own path and build a structure that suits your situation. And there's this heartwarming story about Jamie when he was little, setting off on his own imaginary adventure like Calvin and Hobbes. It perfectly shows how secure and loved he felt, despite their unusual family setup.
The progress we've made in changing how people see families is clear in that story she tells about Jamie when he was 4. He saw a cardboard cutout of an astronaut and just assumed it was someone's mommy. That simple assumption is a far cry from John Glenn's testimony back in 1962, where he talked about the social order and completely ignored those incredible Mercury 13 women.
We've definitely come a long way, but she also points out those persistent, often invisible barriers and gender inequalities that still exist, like unequal pay, limited opportunities for women to advance, and the expectation that women should be the primary caregivers. The COVID-19 pandemic really exposed these deep-rooted problems, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And she's right when she says that these disadvantages hurt everyone. Diverse teams are proven to be more effective and innovative. She really emphasizes that we each need to stand up for our own definition of family, regardless of what it looks like. We need to rewrite those outdated rules.
She acknowledges that everyone's situation is different and we all have different resources, but she believes we might have more choices than we think. She encourages us to find and use those opportunities to create a more flexible and inclusive culture wherever we are. She ends by talking about that constant tension between demanding careers and parenting, the hard choices, the goodbyes. But she also affirms the power of love, that it endures despite the distance.
So what we've learned from our astronauts' incredible experiences is that it takes a huge amount of effort, resilience, and creativity to make a demanding career and a non-traditional family life work. Her story shows us how important it is to have supportive relationships and to be willing to adapt, innovate, and redefine what normal means.
It makes you think about your own life, right? What are those unwritten rules that you're dealing with in your job, your family, your personal life? And here's something to think about after our deep dive is over. Where in your life could you embrace that idea of function over form? Could it lead to new solutions, more fulfillment for you, and maybe even positive change in the world around you? Take some time to examine those assumptions you have about work-life balance and how we define success and family. These things are always changing.